lawyers, we've got investigative journalist Sam Judy, who wrote a really moving piece for The Barbed Wire about his friend Yaqub and what the abduction means for free speech in the United States. And last but not least, we were honored to learn yesterday that Sami Hamdi himself and his wife Samoya are going to be joining us shortly. Oh, there's Sami now. So Sami and Samoya, we're very thrilled to have you here. We were just getting to you in the intro when you joined, Sami. Um, we want our audience to be able to hear from you firsthand. It'll make the discussion that much more powerful. I didn't prepare a lot of questions for you because I didn't know you were going to be here, but feel free to jump in anytime you have something to add to the discussion. And I want to note that given how many people we have here and how important this topic is, I anticipate that it'll run over the 1 hour we have scheduled. If anyone needs to jump, either speakers or guests, no problem at all. We'll talk to whoever's left, and you can catch the rest of the event later on our YouTube channel, youtube.com at freedom of press. So let's get started, and I'll start with you, Sami, and thanks again so much for making time to be with us. But for people who aren't familiar with your case, can you tell us a bit about who you are and what you've been through over the last few weeks? And your counsel is here who can give us all the legal details, but we really appreciate the opportunity to hear from you firsthand.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, thank you to everybody who's here. Thank you for everybody. I can see the number of participants. Thank you for everybody who's given me the time here and for the opportunity to speak. I'm a journalist for about 15, 16 years, and also a consultant for various different companies. And on this particular occasion, I'd been touring the United States for the past 3 years and other countries, Australia, countries in Europe. I know in America, for you guys, Europe is all one place, but I can assure you it's many different countries in one. But in any case, I had been touring and trying to analyze and push this phenomenon of the shift in public opinion through the use of people using social media and speaking out and using very democratic, legitimate forms, believing that the voice of the truth is greater than the voice of hatred, the voice of justice is stronger than the voice of injustice, and that ordinary people, the reason why perhaps they don't have an opinion on one of the most heinous crimes of our generation is because they don't know much about it, and therefore education will break the hold of this pro-genocide lobby. And therefore, while they need to spend millions in lobbying and the like, we don't need to spend anywhere near that kind of money, because the truth of the matter will prevail in the end. 2 weeks prior to my arrest, an individual called Dinesh D'Souza online with 1.3 million followers on Twitter, I didn't know much about him prior to this, found a clip of a lecture that I gave in Kuala Lumpur, in which in this particular clip I say, quote, "Because you all screamed on social media, you managed to break the algorithm, reach the Americans directly, and when they heard your voice of truth, their hearts flipped, and the hearts flipped in even the most unlikeliest of places, like the likes of Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and these others." Dinesh D'Souza took this video clip and tweeted, if I remember the quote correctly, it was, "Muslim Brotherhood jihadist operator celebrates the efforts of Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson in spreading Islam in America." Grok would respond and say, nothing in this video even mentions anything related to spreading Islam. No proof is Muslim Brotherhood. This is Dinesh D'Souza talking about something clearly that's not related in the video. But an individual called Ted Cruz, a senator from Texas, retweeted it, and it gained some prominence. And it reached the radar the following week of a lady called Laura Loomer. And Laura Loomer, on the Monday before I was arrested, she tweeted and said that there is an individual who is touring the United States, I'm abbreviating what she said, criticizing the Israelis. We need to get his visa removed and revoked. So I sent this particular tweet to some learned individuals who said that just keep an eye on it, but it's unlikely. This is a land of freedom of speech. The idea that Laura Loomer could somehow be the arbiter of who can say what in this country is a ludicrous notion. On the Wednesday, she tweeted and said, guys, I'm in Congress. She put some Islamophobic tweet about the way that Muslims wash to prepare for prayer. And she tweeted after that, I have great news coming in 2 days about a certain individual currently touring the United States. And I knew that she was talking about me. In any case, I ignored it. On the Friday, I gave my talk in Bay Area. On Saturday, I gave my talk in Sacramento, in which I argued that the battle in America in the midterm elections is not Republican-Democrat. It's America first versus Israel first. And I was alluding to the New York elections in Mamdani, in that Mamdani was facing off not against the Republicans, but against Chuck Schumer, Trump, Cuomo, Hakeem Jeffries, all of these lumped in one supporting Cuomo, versus Mamdani, who found the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson praising his America first policy of affordability and the like in New York. On the Sunday morning, I actually overslept on the Sunday morning. My flight was 7:30. I overslept 10 past 6. Somebody who was supposed to drive me to the airport had come to the hotel and was ringing me incessantly from the reception. May God forgive him. But in any case, I got up, went downstairs. I don't know how he got me to the airport in time. I arrived 45 minutes before takeoff 7:30 a.m. I arrived 6:45. I check in my luggage. I go through security. I'm wearing a fancy Malaysian batik that the Americans call the disco shirt because sometimes some people lack culture. But in any case, I looked up to see where gate D38 was for the flight to Tampa. As I'm looking up like this, somebody says, "Excuse me." And I look in front of me. There's somebody who's clearly been waiting for me. "Are you Sami Hamdi?" I said, "Yes." They said, "Sir, your visa was revoked 2 days ago. And so now you are here illegally. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I said, "No one told me my visa was under review. No one told me my visa was revoked. I'm a British citizen. What's this stuff about my visa being revoked?" So he takes out a piece of paper, shows it to me, and he says, "This is the memo from the State Department." And I'm reading it, and there is no reason stated on the paper. It just says, section this, article this, State Department has the right to revoke a visa, but there is no charge. There's nothing being said here. And at the bottom it says, "We command every officer to arrest this individual and detain him." So I asked the guy, I said to him, what's the reason for my arrest?" "Sir, they don't tell us that stuff. We were just told to wait for you and you have to come with us." So I said to him, "Well, if the case is about going home," I was supposed to, by the way, fly to Florida, then fly to New York, and then fly home. So I was supposed to be home in 4 or 5 days anyway. So I said to him, "Okay, in this case, there's 6 flights a day from SFO. I'll book my ticket to London now and then just go to the gate." "That's not how this works," he said. And then 5 other agents appeared around me. So you're looking left, you're looking right. Well, this is my left, but you're looking left, you're looking right. There's all these people around you. So I thought, I won't cause a commotion over here. Let me go with them, see where this goes. They escorted me out of the airport, and I find a black car with tinted windows waiting for me. They said to me, "Sir, please get into the car." And I said to him, almost verbatim, "With the greatest of respect, this feels like a movie." And, you know, I've seen this, you know, where you throw somebody into a car, etc. I'm a British citizen with rights. I'm not getting into the car. I want to use my phone to call a lawyer, to call somebody who can advise me on my rights and what to do in this situation. They said, "You're not allowed a phone call." I said, "With the greatest of respect, I don't need to believe who you say you are, even if you have a fancy badge. I'm not moving from here until I call a lawyer or let somebody know what's happening to me. Otherwise, we can just stand here all day." So one of them says to me, "You got 1 minute," in this very aggressive tone. So I thought in my mind, who do I call? Who do I call? Who do I call? Who do I call? And I thought, Hussein Ailouche from the Council of American Islamic Relations, Civil Liberties Organization. I messaged him. He replied 10 seconds, "Comply, but ask them where you're going." "Excuse me, where am I going?" "Sir, just get in the car. At least tell me where I'm going." "Sir, get in the car." Then I said, "Okay, let me call my family and let them know I'm okay." As soon as I finished the sentence, an agent from behind me grabs me, throws me against the car, handcuffs me from behind really tightly. Then they grab me and they throw me into the car. We drive for about half an hour to an ICE processing center. When we get there, they put me in a cell. They make me wait 2 hours. And then they come and they give me a piece of paper. And they tell me, "Sign this piece of paper." The paper says that I'm guilty of what I'm charged of, and I agree to the deportation order. I said, "I haven't committed no crime, and I'm not, you shouldn't deport. My visa is still valid. It's until 2028. I have a 10-year B1, B2 visa that entitles me to visit the US for 6 months a year." They said, "Sir, if you sign this, we'll get you home." I said, "I'm not signing it. When can I call my lawyer?" "You'll eventually get your call." "Well, if you want me to sign it, let me see my lawyer first." It was a real back and forth. Eventually, I was still cuffed. They took me, they loaded me in the back of a van. And this is wild I expect it maybe in Tunisia where my father's from, but in America, this was a very surreal experience. The van looks big, but when they open the door in the back, you find it's the space that you're sitting in is 80 centimeters by 4 meters. So you're sitting cuffed with your hands and your legs and a chain around your body, sitting there, but they don't tell you where you're going. So I can't inform anybody. Where am I going? They don't tell you. 2 hours and a half in the back of a van with a small window the size of my head with some railings on it. I'm trying to remember California's geography. Which way are we going? I should have learned how the sun looks north, south, east, west. I'll be sure to learn that from now on. But in any case, I'm looking outside. 2 hours and a half later, we arrive at a car park where there is like an In-N-Out burger shop nearby. They unload me off the van, then they bundle me into another black car, and then we drive another 2 hours and a half until we eventually arrive in the McFarland facility. When we enter the McFarland facility, and I don't want to, take up too much time, everybody's time, but I'll try to make this as brief as possible. When we enter the facility, it's heavily guarded. First door, second door, third door, we go in. And in front of me in the corridor are 2 Indians and a Latino individual. So she's checking us in, the lady, one by one. She starts with the Latino. She says to the Latino, "Where are you from?" And the Latino, as a joke, says, "I'm from Afghanistan." And the lady says, "Oh, your people want to kill my people." And the Latino guy looks horrified, and we're all looking, what's going on? So the Latino says, "No, no kill anyone, no." And the lady goes, "Your people, they want to kill Americans. People in that area, they want to kill them." And I turn my head, "Excuse me, man. That's categorically not true. Like, really." And the Latino guy saying, "I'm Mexican, I'm not Afghan, fine. It's a poor joke." Just to give you an insight into what I perceive to be the mentality of the guards who are going to be watching over us. Thankfully, she went for a lunch break. A man introduced me, but rather did the checking in process. After that, they took us into a hall. This hall had more than 95 people there in bunk beds, clearly overcrowded, not enough pillows, not enough blankets, and they leave you there. All this time, I'm asking to speak to my lawyer at every occasion, and ICE, with an air of impunity, are saying, "Listen, excuse me, no, I'm talking. No, we'll tell you when you can call your lawyer. We'll tell you when you can have your phone call. Excuse me, now you're detained. Listen to me, you are in a very aggressive manner, as if I am a criminal, even though I'm supposed to be innocent until proven guilty." They take me to the bunk bed, and then eventually they say, "You got 5 minutes free calls on these payphones." I quickly call my wife, quickly call my lawyers, and the like. The following day, so we had the meal, sweet corn with black spots on it, beans that tasted like they were taken 2 days after the expiry date, meat that smelled very off. I mean, I know American food can be a lot of chemicals in them, but this one was beyond anything that I had smelt before in the past. The following morning after the dinner, I woke up with an agonizing pain on my left side. And I felt like it was, like my kidney exploded. To lighten the mood a little bit, when 2 people visited me, I told them I pointed here. Like, I pointed here and I said, "I thought my kidney burst." And they grinned. I said, "Guys, it's not a laughing matter." They told me, "Sami, your kidney's behind you, not in the front of you." But in any case, during the time, really, it was agonizing pain. Turn left, turn right, stand up, jump up and down. Is it trap gas? Walk around. What's going on? "Excuse me, guard." And now I'm panting. I'm feeling the pain. It's horrific pain. I say, "Can I see a doctor?" We've let the medical team know. But when are they coming? They'll come when they come. 1 hour passes, 2 hour passes. The Indians in the unit came. "We think we know what's wrong with you, but take this ibuprofen because you're going to go through a lot of pain in the next few days." By 3rd or 4th hour, the guard is starting to show sympathy. They can clearly see I'm in agony. But they don't call the doctor. What they do is, she came up to me and she said, "Listen, the doctor's been here for the last 3 hours, but if you want them to come, drop on the floor right now. Otherwise, they're not coming." Like that. Drop on the floor right now. Otherwise, they're not coming. Instead of dropping on the floor, I called my wife. I said, "Let the media know." And then the doctors would come later on, very angry, clearly like somebody had shouted them or the like. But there's one more experience before, the legal team can talk about what happened in the courts and the federal courts, etc. But there's one more experience I want to talk about in this, in that on the 3rd night or 2nd night, Marium might be able to correct me on this, but I called the lawyers and I said, "They're taking me to Fresno." So the guards came and said, Sami, in the beginning, they're like, bunk four, bunk four. I said, I'm not a number. I'll wait till he says my name. Bunk four, Hamdi, Hamdi. Wait, Sami. Okay, very good. Yes, get ready. You're going to Fresno. Inmates went, oh my God, you're going to Fresno. Going to Fresno now. At 9 p.m., they're telling you, get ready. Are you being transferred? Are they taking you to Texas? You don't want to go to Texas. Believe me, you don't want to go to Texas. You don't want to go Florida. You should call your lawyers now. Sami, listen, Texas is way worse than what you have here in California. So I called the lawyers. Lawyers said, what's in Fresno? What's in Fresno? Or the like. I said, listen, I'm very worried. So they take me out. They cuff me very tightly. I assume everybody knows how ICE works, but it's all for-profit companies that's outsourced. G4S do the transportation, Geo look after the facilities, and what that results in is that nobody knows what the other is doing. You ask the Geo staff, where am I going? I don't know. G4S, what's happening? I don't know. The ICE person, I don't know. Nobody knows what's going on at any moment in time. So they cuff my legs very tightly and they load 15 of us onto a bus and they drive us for 1 hour and 45 minutes in a very cramped van. We arrive about midnight, quarter past midnight at this Fresno center. The irony is that on one of the tours, I had stayed in the Doubletree Hilton opposite this ICE facility, but I never realized it was an ICE facility. How this fortunes change. But in any case, when we arrived, there's no ICE officer there in the office. It's just the G4S guards. Excuse me, what's happening? You're spending the night in the cell. Now, the cell is 5 meters, I'd say, 5-6 meters on this side, 5 meters maybe this side, and then it's triangular. 15 of us in this space. 15. They gave us out yoga mats, and they said, giving out yoga mats in Texas, they don't give you yoga mats, and everybody's sleeping cramped. You know, the 15. But our legs are still cuffed, and my cuffs are still very tight. The next morning, about 9 a.m. in the morning, we don't have a time, and the lights, they stay on, the bright lights throughout the whole night. The next morning, you wake up, you can hear the ICE guards coming in laughing. Hey, good morning. How are you? You know, you got my coffee, you know, as if it's normal. So you knock on the door. Excuse me, please. My cuffs are tight. Get away from the door, sir. Get away from the door, sir. I'm going blue. You can see on my legs, it's going blue. Away from the door, sir. We sit there, then ICE, they open the door, they call you. Hamdi, you go first. Why am I here in Fresno? What's going on? They gave me a piece of paper. They told me your court date of November 6th has been changed to November 10th. Why has my court date been changed? And bear in mind, this happens to almost every inmate. This is ICE's tactic when they feel they're going to lose a case in front of the court. So why was it changed from November 6th to November 10th? Well, sir, on the original charge sheet, it says that you landed in Santa Ana, California, which is true. Okay, we've changed it to you were pre-cleared in Calgary. What difference does it make? It's such a minor detail. They're both true. Yes, but because we changed this, your court is delayed for 4 days. That's the way things operate here. By the way, would you like to sign the deportation and just go home right now? Literally like that. And I called Hassan at that time, who was my lawyer. He just popped up on the screen. I called Hassan. I said, listen, I need to call my lawyer now. And they said, well, there's no way to call your lawyer. I said, give me your phone. I'll call my lawyer. And the guy went, okay, *61#. I don't know what that does to a phone. And then dialed in the number. And then Hassan told me, don't sign what they tell you to sign. They are not your friends, he said in a very strong American accent. In any case, after I was done, they put me back in the cell. And I remained there for the rest of the day until 10 p.m. at night. And then when they loaded me onto the van to take me back, one of the Latino guards looks at my legs and says, oh my goodness, they're going blue. And he loosens the cuffs a little bit. When I get back to the facility, the warden at this time, now the media has gone, you know, with the headlines, which I think is the reason why they loosened my cuffs. Because I entered back in the facility and the warden went, oh, the famous guy. The reason why I mentioned this story about Fresno in particular, I went to Fresno 3 times. It's a miserable experience. No one wants to go to Fresno. But the reason why the treatment improved slightly, not great, but slightly, was because of the media attention I had. The other inmates don't get that. And I just want to, before I hand over, I just want to give 2 stories about 2 particular inmates. There was a brother in Texas. He had his master hearing. Then he had that evidence hearing, I think, or wherever that second hearing is for. And he's 3 days away from his final hearing. ICE, 3 days before his final hearing, at midnight, they grab him from his bunk, they load him on a plane, and they ship him off to California. And now he's restarting from the master hearing again, because for some reason they can't present him in front of the Texas hearing in that regard. We had a Kyrgyz guy who the judge had ruled that his asylum application is recognized and he is to be released. The reason he remains detained is ICE, before he appears in front of a judge again for the release, ICE are trying to find a third country to deport him to and keep presenting him with a paper for him to be deported. A guy called Emmanuel from Texas, who was also relocated before his final hearing, when I said to him, but you've got the court order which says that you are to be released, you've got the judge, not the court order, but the judge says you should be released. He said, yes, but now apparently because they can't take me to Congo, they're now asking Ghana if they can send me to Ghana instead. What I realized with ICE, and this is the point I finish on, is that ICE are aware that the overwhelming majority of these cases won't win they will win in court. ICE will lose in the court. So they find all these bureaucratic loopholes to delay you appearing in front of those courts. And what I found in the detention center was it becomes a battle of wills. Who's going to blink first? ICE leave you in the detention center for as long as possible until an Uzbek 70-year-old man on the bunk next to me, who's been there for 1 year, 1 month, says, I know my case can win in court, but I don't want to stay here anymore. Just send me home. Just ship me home and get me out of this American country of yours. And in the words of one of the inmates, he said, we know they want us to blink, but as the days goes on, it gets harder to hold on. And that's why I think that ICE's attitude acts with impunity. But the reason I mentioned the media, and I promise this is where I finish, but the reason I mentioned the media is when finally, you know, these magnificent lawyers of mine, Hassan, Marium, and Layli, and Amina, and Zahra, and these others, when finally the deal had been made that I would go home, and DHS's lawyers pulled strings that some of the media attention can get in a way that other inmates don't get at all, and I'm aware of my privilege in that regard. When they were taking me to the airport for 2 hours and a half, they were telling me sob stories about how hard it is to ruin other people's lives. They were saying, you know, we at ICE, you know, we are misunderstood. And I said, I've been with you guys for 2 weeks. I swear to you, you are not misunderstood. In fact, I think media was very light on you, to be honest, based on what I've seen. They said, no, listen, we didn't want to treat you like a criminal. It's just for our safety. I told them, don't worry. I will tell the world everything about everything I saw and everything that I saw in these detention facilities. Don't you worry. The point here I'm making is this. The reason ICE acts with impunity is because a lot of media focus on people being detained, but they don't focus on the conditions in those facilities. They're not focusing on what the day-to-day is, how it grates on your mentality, how a Chechnyan 23-year-old, who the court has recognized that he can't be deported because Russia will send him to fight in Ukraine, and he doesn't want to fight in Ukraine. But because ICE won't put him in front of a court for his release, he's now on mental health pills and getting into regular altercations because the medication is affecting his mental health. You have a guy, Antonio, this is really just this, I'm taking this opportunity just in case somebody has an idea how to help these people. Antonio, in America, 18 years, wife is a citizen, kids are a citizen, and he was invited to a green card update your details meeting. No idea what it is, but they grabbed him at the appointment. Now, he's been there 9 months. He finally is about to have his final hearing. We're all helping him prep. You know, he's writing his paper. Everybody's like, come on, Antonio, amigo, don't worry. You know, like, you got this, whatever. He leaves and he comes back within half an hour. Antonio, how did it go? He said, the other side said they didn't have time to read the evidence. Judge said they didn't have time to read the evidence. And the judge went, let's postpone to January 29th. Another 3 months just added, just like that. The inmates used to say, I don't know why you pray, Sami. God doesn't exist between these walls, and neither does the law. And the way I treat the inmates, you can see it. There is a lady in the Texas facility, Liqa Kurdiya, and you have Marwan Maroof and these others, who, while they are being detained, their rights are being violated. Why? Because people don't talk about them in the way that they spoke about me in the facility. The guards felt it after the media came and did the headlines. It was almost as if, don't offend this guy. This guy might ruin us afterwards, like him. which makes me wonder, they know what they're doing is illegal. They know that it's wrong. They know that if the American public finds out the realities of what's happening, ICE will be dismantled in an instant. That's my genuine opinion. And that's why I think in this regard, I know I threw a lot in terms of, just random thoughts that I said over here, but I was aware of it's heartbreaking watching these inmates. We saw a headline that we're deporting criminals, ICE is deporting criminals. And we all looked around and said, well, who's the criminal here? No one is there. It's such a heartbreaking phenomenon. And what broke my heart was my wife said to me when I came home, she said, I know you're happy, but there's a sense of heartbreak on your face. I told her, Wallah, Sumaya, these people, they're a forgotten people and they don't deserve to be there. They do not deserve to be there. It's such a tragic injustice what ICE are doing to these people. And I think the reality is that the ICE officers know it. All it takes is for a concerted effort to put a spotlight on that. And my dream is that it gets dismantled for the atrocities that they're committing in these facilities.
Well, thanks so much, Sami. I mean, it's remarkable that you're able to tell your story with energy and even some humor so soon after everything you went through. And I couldn't agree more that the focus needs to be on the detention as much as the detainment, and that not only with ICE detentions, but really with the entirety of the American system of incarceration. You could say the same. So thanks so much, and I'm sorry to whoever needs to follow that, but it's going to be someone who's probably used to talking before or after you. Samoya, if you are here with us, I'm hoping that you might be able to speak, from your perspective, what it was like to await Sami's return and whether this was a scenario you contemplated when he went for his one of many speaking tours, given what the U.S. has become as of late. What was your experience like?
So I guess I'm the one that has to come after Sami. Thank you very much there. To be honest, although we're aware of the political climate in the US at the moment, and Sami had told me that there were some far-right influencers alluding to trying to cause trouble for him, I don't think any of us envisaged this, because we kind of expect that the United States, like the United Kingdom, follows due process and there are rules, and if you follow the rules, then you'll be fine. And actually, a couple of days before this happened, Sami showed me a tweet in which Laura Loomer said, stay tuned, something's going to be happening in a couple of days. I've just come back from Congress, which in itself is alarming. Why is this unelected social media influencer allowed to have access to the eyes and ears and hands of Congress? I mean, that on its own is so concerning. And I remember he mentioned to me, he said, he'd spoken to a few friends and they said he doesn't need to worry. But I did say to him at the time, yeah, but Sami, like, you're not a US citizen. You're a visitor. You don't, you do have legal status in the country, but you are still a visitor. And we are aware that ICE we're aware that some people are using immigration routes through which to silence political dissenters. And that for me is what the scary thing was. So honestly, hearing the news, I heard it from a third party. Actually, one of my clients from the summer texted me saying, is it true that Sami's been abducted by ICE? And it was, I think, the worst thing I've ever read. And I think for me and for his parents, especially, it's been the worst few weeks of our lives, especially the first week where we couldn't contact him. We were not sure where they were going with this, and especially with the kind of public proclamations on social media by the Department of Homeland Security, making these horrendous accusations against Sami, which I think for anyone are the scariest allegations that can be made, because we all know what follows after that. So it's been an incredibly stressful experience. I think we've all probably aged a lot in the last few weeks. It's felt like it was a year, to be honest. But at the same time, I have to say that the kind of the silver lining has been the incredible outpouring of support globally from the community. I'm talking about kind of across the board, Muslims and non-Muslims, journalists, non-journalists, activists, social media influencers, of course, the fantastic legal team who were pulled together literally within a couple of hours. I don't think we could have anticipated that level of support and how it came together so quickly. Because I'm sure for everyone who enters this situation, it's really daunting to think about how you're going to have to navigate this process. And, you know, I say that as someone who speaks English as their native language and knows how to use technology. And I really struggled in those first few days trying to figure out how we can reach Sami. How can we contact him? How do we use these ICE tablet software things, which, by the way, I think separately should be investigated for being deliberately designed to prevent people from being able to contact their family members, because as someone who's grown up using technology, they don't make any sense at all and they're almost impossible to use. And the whole process, as Sami said, it feels like it's designed just to grate on you. Like simple things, like we had a friend visiting Sami and we said to him, look, we know that Sami's really struggling with the food. We know that there are vending machines there. So please, could you just take some cash to allow him to have something that's edible? So he got there and then he found out that he needs to have quarters. Is it quarters? Yeah, so the vending machines only take quarters. Again, like, why? So, okay, no problem. He went to the bank and took out $100 in quarters. Can you imagine? But then when he went back and he used the quarters to buy simple things like bottles of water, this is inside the facility itself. Sami was told, you're not allowed to take this food back to your cell, your dorm area. You have to have it only during that meeting time, even though this is food that has been bought on the center. So it's a combination of being deliberately obstructive and, as Sami said, trying to wear down on you. But also there's a huge element of how do we make as much money as possible from these people? Like I spent about $200 on my credit card trying to access Sami using this tablet that they have. I still need to claim it back from my credit card provider, but it's a minefield. And as I said, I'm a native English speaker. I can't imagine how many of these people are managing when their families are Latino or Russian or whatever. Like it's almost impossible for them to then be able to communicate with their family members. And, you know, you can only imagine how awful that is and how alone they feel. And I think for me, the biggest concern is that, as Sami said, these are almost black holes where the law doesn't apply. And the worry is that this is starting, I think in my view, it started when we see how Palestinians are treated in Israel, in the West Bank, and, you know, this kind of arbitrary detention, no charge, no trial, just held for years on end, minors held for years on end. This kind of feels like it's coming home to roost. And, you know, there is that saying, right, that when you don't speak up for injustice elsewhere, it does come to bite you in the future. And my worry is that in our lifetimes, we will see that this this kind of gradual eroding of the rule of law is going to affect all of us. Yes, at the moment, it's starting with people who are technically not US citizens, although that doesn't make them any less human. But it's a matter of time before a precedent is set, in my view, a legal precedent is set, as well as a social precedent that will enable this type of treatment to extend to US citizens. And that is a really scary thought. And after that, it's a slippery slope to what we see in North Korea, you know, like, or what we hear about, not see, but what we hear about happens in these places. And I don't think anyone wants that.
Thanks so much to both of you. I want to move on to Sam to talk a bit about the other subject of today's discussion, journalist Yaqub Vihandre, who can't be here to tell his own story. But Sam, since you personally know Yaqub, I'd like to give you a chance to talk about who he is from the perspective of a friend who, for anyone who might have not read your great article in The Barbed Wire yet.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I'd met Yaqub now over 2 years ago. We met in that we were covering protests in the aftermath of, you know, the attack and then Israel's intense bombardment of Gaza in that following week, and then that never really stopped, that siege that kept going on and on and on, and is still going on despite the ceasefire. But I remember he just had, I mentioned in the piece that Yaqub's energy is very, he has a very big energy as a person. He moves with a lot of purpose. You can tell that there's always something on his mind. And there's something always that he's kind of focused towards and kind of striving towards. And then, we got to know each other in the same way that any two reporter colleagues do. It can be a little bit lonely being a reporter because you kind of have to maintain the certain boundary. But I remember working with Yaqub. It always felt like there was kind of a sense of camaraderie between us. And eventually he started kind of bringing me in on things that he was investigating. So Afia Siddiqui, for instance, Dr. Afia, who is being held at FMC Carswell and is currently suffering horrible, horrible conditions. That his fantastic interviews with folks like Alan Shabaro and other former members of U.S. military that have spoken on Israel's approach, their strategies, basically everything that Yaqub ever covered had this great sense of depth to the reporting. And a lot of people, I feel like they might try to act like Yaqub in the sense that he advocates for the people that he, makes his content for or makes his content covering. That there's a sense of that it's too much on the line of being an activist rather than being a reporter. I wholly disagree with that. I believe being a good activist is being a good reporter, and being a good reporter sometimes means being a good activist. And I've said this to Yaqub. I remember this was one of the first conversations we had where I told him that I really appreciated what he did on the basis that, when you are a reporter, when you're a journalist, I always say this, if you're not setting out to advocate for someone, then you will end up exploiting them. That's just the nature of the work. That's just the nature of media. You bring someone's story to a newsroom and people kind of pick off of it like vultures. And Yaqub has always been so protective of his work and of the people that he would cover. And yeah, so when he got picked up by ICE on October 7th of this year, I frankly wasn't super surprised. Just because his work is consequential, his work is very meaningful, and we're kind of in that state in this country. I mean, the worst that I've ever dealt with in terms of my work, because my work has been, I've written a lot of pro-Palestine pieces for local news, even especially. I wrote a few for Dallas Weekly, a good amount. And the only challenge that I've ever faced as a white Jewish reporter is having a shortage of work for a little bit, having a little bit of a lull, being a little bit blacklisted from certain people. But then after the time passes, then people start to see, oh, you're still around, so you're really about it, you really can do it. And Yaqub has always kept his work always 100 miles per hour. He was always driving so far, and he was always looking for the next thing, and he was always seizing every opportunity to talk about what's going on in Gaza, what's going on with Israel's entire reign of terror that they have going on in the region in general. And I guess it was very I knew when Yaqub got arrested that it's like we've already said, whenever you don't speak for injustice in another place, is going to come home to roost. It's going to come back and bite you. And it felt like that kind of bearing where it's like, we as a country, whether or not, it's like whether politically with the kind of lack of movement from Democrats, for instance, or you know, any sense of apathy among the population or any populations where things don't affect you necessarily. I think that, you know, Seth, you're over in Chicago, you know, it's like in Chicago, this is a very, this is kind of a thing that I've heard from a lot of friends of mine that live there, where some folks are like, yeah, well, that's a problem with brown folks. That's a problem with Latinos. We're not going to necessarily have to deal with that stuff. And obviously, this is kind of widening out to affect everybody, whether you're a reporter or not. And I feel like I'm kind of circling a point here, but yeah, you know, I feel like all I have in terms of my thoughts on Yaqub's case is just intense disappointment at the system. Not really surprised at the system. You know, love for my friend. I know that he's very strong, but he's also currently in Folkestone, which is a detention center in Georgia that's already had, you know, so many accusations of neglect and abuse and horrible conditions and a lot of the things that Sami spoke about. And to emphasize what Sami said, really, it's like that is hitting the nail on the head. That is exactly what DHS is attempting to do. DHS wants to kill people's spirit. They want to make them just kind of just not really. They know that that through the courts that a lot of things can be accomplished. I mean, LaConcordia has been ordered to be released twice with two different judges. And she has still not been released. We have situations like Marwan Maroof, who was a volunteer of the Holy Land Foundation. And then that's another thing, is that we have these really difficult situations where the Holy Land Foundation case is a very challenging one. I don't know if attendees are familiar with the case, but the Holy Land Foundation case, to kind of abridge it in maybe somewhat of an adequate sense, but the best sense that I could possibly kind of break it down to, is that this was one of the largest Muslim nonprofits that America has ever had, and they were supporting Palestinian orphans, supporting Palestinians, and the United States government found them guilty of terrorism, said that they were providing material support for Hamas. Now we have those existing legal battles that we've had, where, you know, now we have to decide, you know, basically, are we going to, what's the plan of attack? You know what I mean? Like, it's like when we have this kind of rock and a hard place of DHS and ICE doing all they can to kind of keep situations out of the courts, but then also they're trying to kind of build up their ammunition in the courtroom in the case that they might have to actually go into the courtroom. They found that stuff on, they lay a foundation of you know, hatred, of you know, xenophobia, of these verdicts that are already have these racist overtones to them. And yeah, you know, I'm definitely pulling for Yaqub, and he's, when we've worked together as much as we have on certain things, you know, like I'd mentioned, that Afia Siddiqui video that he has on his page that we cross-posted between our pages, you know, I don't really see a difference between the reporting that I do and the reporting that Yaqub does, to be completely honest. And that's kind of what I was speaking on in the piece, that if there's not really any real logical difference, then that is something that's going to come and bite a lot of reporters, whether that is through, you know, ICE as an agency or another three-letter agency. It might be any three-letter agency of the United States. It might be the federal government through many apparatuses. And, you know, that's something that we all should have a great deal of concern for. But I'm going to stop talking so I don't keep on rambling, but yeah.
Really appreciate it, Sam, and maybe picking up on what you were saying about xenophobia that in the courtrooms, and that is sort of baked into the cases that are brought against these pro-Palestine journalists. Marium, since you're involved in both cases, maybe you can tell us legal basics in terms of where they stand, as well as how they fit into these broader patterns of targeting pro-Palestine speakers and journalists in particular, and the kinds of attitudes, the kinds of xenophobia, Islamophobia that you need to overcome to advocate in these cases.
Sure, I'd be happy to, and hopefully my remarks won't take up that much time. I really am super grateful to the Freedom of Press Foundation for putting this together, as well as having, the privilege and pleasure of being able to hear from Sami, Sumaya, and Sam Judy. I think it's obvious to all of us that the people on this call, the panelists, are very appreciative for collective work that defends a free press and protects dissent. Without a doubt, as is styled the title of this panel, we're looking at those whose voices for Palestinian causes have caused them to undergo this type of, detention is one form of, we could call it suffering, but in reality, it's an oppression. I do want to highlight that the common thread between Yaqub and Sami is that they are both, I took this down when Sami was speaking, outspoken, confident, and courageous. They both speak English. They both are privileged. Much to Sami's chagrin, he's a British citizen, but he was also lucky enough to be in California. For each one of them, there are countless others who lack those attributes. And when you look at the conditions of detention that both Sami and Sam have spoken to, clearly we're looking at treating people like animals, excessive force, lack of access to counsel, and lack of medical care. When I see the panelists and I recognize that half of you is Jewish, I think that that's a really interesting place to be in terms of where the pendulum is in this country. So to speak to Yaqub's case briefly, and we've got Samantha and Chris on the call to be able to really dive into the legal aspects of it. I just want to give some background. He's a Filipino-American photojournalist, community documentarian living in Dallas, came to the US as a child, grew up here living in the US for 24 years. 12 of those years he had DACA protection. His great-grandfather and great-uncle were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for their service in the U.S. military during World War II. No criminal record, repeatedly been approved for DACA protection, most recently in May of 2024, with a valid approval until May of 2026. So much like Sami, the government seeking to terminate status and based on social media posts when they have been visible, peaceful chroniclers of Palestinian human rights activism. Specifically to Yaqub, as Sami mentioned, he's been at the forefront of exposing due process violations, particularly miscarriages of justice and inhumane prison conditions in cases prosecuted in the war on terror, including Dr. Afia Siddiqui, as Sam mentioned, the HLF defendants, and now, ironically, the victim of the very governmental overreach and state repression he has long documented. So in September, when he was suddenly detained by ICE after years of lawful presence and reporting, his pickup was rapid, again, without meaningful access to counsel. And at one point, during a second abduction, when he was transferred in the middle of the night without notice to his attorneys, resulted in the confiscation of his Quran, his prayer beads, his prayer rug, the things that actually sustain him. As Sam mentioned, he's universally described by those who know him as gentle, curious, generous, and deeply principled. So when our communities lose journalists like him to state detention, it certainly dims our public understanding and democratic participation. Again, I'm going to have, hopefully, I won't take up any time on the legal side of it, since Samantha and Chris can speak to the habeas case and what it argues, and especially our most recently amended petition that exposed this shocking bond hearing that took place on November 3rd, during which the government attorney and immigration judge Suzette Smikle weaponized Yaqub's faith and speech. I do want to come back to that. But before I do, on Sami's case, although he was able to, portray himself as a jovial person. I mean, we were mostly laughing, we were smiling during what he described. What he described, nevertheless, remains entirely horrific. Picked up on his way in between domestic flights after getting through security, swarmed by 9 different agents in plain clothes, told his visitor visa had been revoked by the Department of State after he had come to this country on invitation to speak, after he had been to this country lawfully multiple times in the past for the very same reason. I think it is outrageous. I'm glad that you could laugh about it, Sami, but being escorted to a government vehicle, as you said, just like it was in a movie, parked curbside outside of your terminal where you're handcuffed, patted down for weapons, and to add insult to injury, having your handcuffs checked for tightness and double locked for safety, that's actually in the government submission. So, when we talk about what the official reason given and formal allegation made in these cases, a visa revoked, possible potential of DACA status, no additional rationale, looking at your social media comments, but then also slyly in whispers saying that the detentions are based on national security grounds, right? Equating the desire for peace and justice and freedom for the people of Palestine as support for terrorism. In Sami's case particularly, as he spoke of that premonition that Laura Loomer had about his detention, that people basically like Sami would be considered unpatriotic, even though they were invited to speak at conferences where free speech is the cornerstone of the event. And Sami himself had just said something really interesting, and that is about the American people and what we represent, our value of being open-minded and always being willing to give a person a fair shake. Punishing both Sami and Yaqub for their stances on the war on Gaza and being punished for standing in allyship with US citizens who expressed solidarity against the genocide. Clearly, some sort of signal from up on high that was heeded. So in terms of that last bond hearing on Yaqub's case that I'll circle back to and turn it over to the rest of our esteemed panelists, Immigration Judge Smykel found that Yaqub's social media activity, which included sharing videos of himself teaching martial arts, liking Instagram posts of Quranic verses, and sharing footage of an event on Dr. Afia Siddiqui's case held at a Dallas mosque, constituted proof that Yaqub endorsed and espoused terrorism. She equated that to him being a danger to the community and a flight risk. And for me personally, you can see based on how I dress, my personal opinion is that when Muslims speak of jihad or Sharia or martyrdom, we are vilified and crucified. And yet when Christian Americans like Charlie Kirk speak of spiritual warfare or living by biblical law, or when his wife, his widow, calls him a martyr for a cause, they are praised. When jihad in Yaqub's case was explained in its true meaning as a struggle, a spiritual and moral striving, the judge and the prosecutor dismissed it and immediately equated it with violence and terrorism. When presented with Arabic calligraphy and an image of a fighter on a horse, imagery that's rooted in our culture and our faith, the reaction was not one of curiosity or neutrality, but one of suspicion and xenophobia. And we've come too far in this country to be at this juncture where this constitutional crisis and crisis of conscience has us scrambling on the back foot. That's all I've got for now, Seth. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marium. I wanted to move on to Samantha, and I'm hoping you can sort of compare these cases we're talking about today with some of the other cases you've been involved in your wearing your other hat with the Atlanta Community Press Collective. Last time you were with us for one of our panels, you spoke about Mario Guevara, who was arrested at a No Kings protest, since deported to El Salvador. And what strikes me as different about that case in a way is that although the government admitted in court to an extent that it was targeting Mario for his speech, they said his live streaming that protest was a public safety hazard, so on and so forth. In public, they claimed his speech had nothing to do with it and that he was being targeted over some sort of minuscule issue with his immigration papers. But here, the government doesn't dispute that Sami and Yaqub were targeted for speech. They don't have any shame in admitting that, whereas in Mario's case, it was, how dare you suggest we would target this journalist for his speech? So is this administration more comfortable admitting that it's targeting speech when it comes to pro-Palestine speech than other? Or is it more of a broader, I would say, I was thinking when Samoya was talking about the domestic equivalent for US citizens, I mean, that's clearly on the way through the criminalization of the entire umbrella of Antifa, which, you know, is a made up organization that is now being used the same way terrorism is used abroad. But you can't fit Mario under the Antifa bucket or under the pro-Palestine terrorism bucket. So in his case, they wouldn't admit to targeting him for his speech, and that really stood out to me. Any sort of comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation. To your question, you know, is this administration more comfortable admitting it's targeting a pro-Palestine speech than other speech? I think it is. I think it is comfortable admitting that it's targeting pro-Palestine speech because it's convincing itself that it's not violating the First Amendment when it punishes pro-Palestine speech, despite the fact that viewpoint-based restrictions on speech are presumptively unconstitutional. And I think it's more comfortable admitting that because of the government's flawed notion that being pro-Palestine is being pro-terrorism. According to this administration, making statements that it thinks are pro-terrorism make those statements not just speech, but acts of material support of terrorism, which takes them out of the realm of speech and which the government cannot regulate consistent with the First Amendment, and puts them into the realm of conduct, which the government can constitutionally regulate. And yeah, as Sam mentioned, you know, Yaqub had a regular presence at pro-Palestine protests and was consistently documenting that movement in Dallas. I think the reason why the government didn't try to make the terrorism argument in Mario Guevara's case is because he didn't make, you know, pro-Palestine statements, or at least, you know, didn't come onto the government's radar by virtue of covering the pro-Palestine movement in Atlanta. And the openness, this brazenness with which the government has admitted that they're targeting Yaqub for his speech is, I think, indicative of the de facto Palestine exception, if folks have heard of that phrase, this de facto Palestine exception to the First Amendment. And, you know, it's important to note that the government doesn't rely on terrorism as the reason for every decision it makes to restrict or punish speech, right? Making the terrorism argument is a very deliberate policy choice. And as we know, this country has a history of using the excuse of terrorism as a pretext to justify systematic abuses of people's constitutional rights. And every time the government equates speech in support of Muslims with terrorism, it invokes a particularly, you know, really dark period in American history and just continues to perpetuate those same racist and xenophobic stereotypes today.
Yeah, and entirely agreed. And another thing that's always striking is that once they utter the magic words of terrorism, from that point forward, they don't even feel compelled to make any sense. You know, in Yaqub's case, they're arguing that he supports terrorism by arguing that people were wrongfully convicted of terrorism. Well, if he believes that they didn't do the terrorism in the first place, then how is he supporting terrorism by supporting them? That's like it's illogical. Or in Sami's case, it's like, okay, we think that you are this supporter of international terrorism, so we're going to send you back home so you can continue your sinister plot against America. You know, what sense does that make? If they sincerely believed what they were saying about Sami, he wouldn't be on this Zoom with us today. Clearly, they know that Sami is not a terrorist. He's merely somebody who has opinions. But anyway, moving on from there, I wanted to move on to you, Chris. Another difference from the Guevara case and some others is that Guevara was undisputedly arrested while he was doing journalism. You know, he was out in the field, he was live streaming a protests. The defendants we're talking about today, they're journalists, but it's somewhat less clear cut whether they were doing the journalism at the time that they were targeted, or whether they were targeted for advocacy or for other speech. I want to get your sense of, you know, does that matter? And especially at this moment in time when so many speakers, no matter what label you want to put on them, are under attack.
Yeah, thanks for having me. At the risk of offending our hosts. No, it doesn't matter, is the short answer, right? The First Amendment refers to the freedom of speech and of the press in the same sentence. There is no distinction, and obviously they're, one doesn't actually make sense without the other. So as a doctrinal matter, there's not really any there's special policy reasons, right? That press is referred to specifically, but legally speaking, there's no distinction between the two, right? Press, the freedom of press is the freedom of someone who operates as a journalist to speak, and there is no distinction between that and someone who's just speaking. I want to. I think it's really important to note that point in particular. I'm coming down with something, so excuse my. I'm like literally going to expire live on this like stream. But people should not care whether or not it is a formal journalist or a social media, reporter who is detained as a result of what they're saying. They are equally dangerous. And in fact, honestly, one is more dangerous than the other, right? One is a much broader protection, and there is no way to sort of put that back in the bottle. If one is not protected, the other one is in danger. This concept of terrorism, right, being used to sort of excuse that, right, to get out of this First Amendment protection is one, as you said, Seth, fundamentally incoherent, right? Like I have yet to be explained. I have yet to hear in my, adult life since I understood the term what the word means. I genuinely do not understand what the word means. And I don't think as a legal matter, I don't think anybody knows what it means. Even as like a political science matter, right? There is no agreed definition. The easiest way to understand that this concept is incoherent is to, when you're a lawyer, right, you kind of learn to say, well, this thing is treated like this thing's treated like that. Or they then can't be, part of the same definition, right? If they have different consequences, different understandings, like one is not like the other. And so consequences fall from that, right? The INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act, prohibits the endorsement or espousal of terrorism, right? It's a direct regulation on speech. It doesn't tell you what endorsement means. It doesn't tell you what espousal means. It doesn't tell you what terrorism means. And yet you're not allowed to do it. It would be insane if an Irish person were detained because they said the IRA had some good points and like acted according to what was necessary given the political circumstances. And that's a more extreme statement, right, than what Yaqub has said. But our position, right, is that prohibition on the endorsement of terrorism is not only is it vague, but you can imagine all sorts of things that I would concede are absolutely endorsements of terrorism are nonetheless protected by the First Amendment, right? There is a very famous case, Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project, that addresses the material support criminal prohibitions. And the Supreme Court said very clearly that they expressed skepticism that a direct regulation on speech, on independent advocacy related to some act of terrorism, whatever that means, could be prohibited and criminally punished consistent with the First Amendment. And there's a good reason for that, right? The line is, does someone incite someone to imminent violence? That's the test. If it's not that, it's protected speech. Non-citizens have First Amendment protections in the United States, despite whatever they're trying to do. That is like black letter law, right? If you are in the United States, you have substantial connections to the United States, which can be based on long-term residence or you're invited to speak, what have you. You have First Amendment rights, and you could go far. Like the line is not even close to what they're pointing to that Yaqub has said. The fact that it's so far away is what is deeply disturbing about this case, right? The material support logic does not exist solely in the immigration law. It's easier for the government to target a non-citizen in immigration proceedings because, as we have demonstrated today, or as the speakers have sort of noted, it is the wild, wild west of law, right? It is just completely buck wild. But those criminal prohibitions, which are not limited to non-citizens in the United States, are easily influenced, right, by this concept of like this very large view of what speech can constitute material support. It, of course, supports, right, if I say something that approves of, right, some act that someone would call an act of terrorism. It's easy to see the logic of why that would be beneficial to the terrorism, the person who did terrorism, whatever that means. Is that material support of terrorism, right? Like, how far away do you have to go? How far away can you go from an actual act before the First Amendment has something to say about it? The line has been drawn. The line was drawn 100 years ago. And yet they are using immigration law as a laboratory, right, to define these new limits using this word that no one can tell you what it means, and yet everyone is universally abhorred, like, horrified by. And yet, in fact, probably if you look at it deeply, would verbalize their support for some act that someone else would call an act of terrorism, right? The revolution in the United States comes to mind, right? There is no limit to the consequences here, right? If the government can stop you from expressing an opinion based on some amorphous definition, right, that is explicitly applied only to certain types of that same exact statement for particular, the speeches about a particular topic, then there just is no First Amendment, right? Like, it just doesn't exist. It's not a gradient. It's an on-off switch. And so, it doesn't matter whether you're a journalist. It doesn't matter whether you're a speaker. It doesn't matter whether you don't speak. You have a right to listen to these things, right? They are just taking a shredder to the First Amendment by doing things like this. And you really, really, like, we have to hold this line, because this is like the wheels are off the bus. And if you don't stop it here, like, it's just going to keep going.
Well said, Chris, and I hope you feel better. Thank you for sticking with us, despite being sick today. I wanted to, and by the way, I know we're over time. This will go on our YouTube page. I'm happy to keep talking to whoever is willing to stay. But if you have to hop, no worries. It'll be on Freedom of the Press Foundation's YouTube page very soon after we conclude today. I did want to talk about the censorship component of all of this. Even and this question was intended for Sam, because at the time I thought he was going to be the only journalist here. But Sami, it would be great if you had something to say here. Even during the last administration, journalists who work for legacy outlets were under pressure from their employers not to take public positions on Gaza. Now, independent journalists who aren't beholden to those corporate conglomerates are under similar pressure from the government. I wanted to talk about what is lost when that incentive structure exists, when journalists are required, not just by those who set norms for the profession, but by the government, by government pressure, to report from this sort of neutral or pro-government place, rather than say anything that might associate them with the underlying movements they're reporting on. And, not only do journalists have to make that choice, but there's also the choice of whether to do journalism at all. particularly if you're not a citizen. If you're somebody who is incapable of talking about Gaza objectively, quote unquote, because you've got family there, and how can you talk about it objectively when you've got family there? You have to choose between expressing those opinions and doing journalism. It's like you can't do both without putting yourself at risk. So what kind of self-censorship does that create, and what's lost to the public in terms of its right to know?
I think that one of the things that is worth noting in this is that there is a deep irony. I sometimes think that we live in an era of the emperor with no clothes, but everybody insists that he's wearing. And I give an example. You go to a university hall, you go to, for example, Oxford and Cambridge, for example, and they will have the world's top professors who preach, for example, the wonderful writings of James Baldwin and Malcolm X and all these other journalists of the past who achieved these incredible, and they will celebrate them until it's their turn to talk about Gaza. Then suddenly everything that they taught with such authority and such, praise and the like, suddenly it's like, no, it was just supposed to be a fairy tale for the books. And I understand the fear factor of it. I think the reality is that we always assume that there is a comfortable way to resist injustice. And I have never, ever read in any period of history that justice was achieved in a way that was comfortable, plain sailing, very easy and the like. We love to celebrate the sacrifices of those who fought for our rights and who campaigned and the like. But when it's our turn to step up, we're suddenly terrified and we say, can somebody else go instead? Can we send Sam or Samantha or somebody else to do it? And, I'll clap for you. And I'll do an interview later about how I was close to you. And so I can tell people, yeah, let me tell you what this person was like. And I get all the credit for it instead. I remember being in Berkeley, when there was a crackdown taking place on the student protesters. So I walked into Berkeley in San Francisco. Berkeley, you guys have these weird things about geography. But anyway, so they had this thing in memory of our brave students, and they're referencing the civil rights period. And it made me laugh. I remarked to a friend, I said, one day they will have the nerve to do something similar for Gaza, in that they are repressing their own students who are standing up for it, but they will make it on their prospectus apply to Berkeley because we in the past had students who stood up for Gaza. This is the institution where you want to be if you want to be people of action and the like. Even my own university, SOAS, which was supposed to be a radical university, a university that always stands up for what's right. I remember we used to go protest after protest and occupy building and all this. We were taught that this is a university where we stand up for what's right. Gaza came and we all looked at our institution and it was unrecognizable. What are you guys doing? Why are you cracking down on those protesters? And I will say it even from my own perspective. This is a scary field. It's not an easy field. Those who enter it, a friend of mine once remarked once, I won't say a friend, my wife, and she's my friend, I guess. But anyway, they said, why is it that when students ask you advice for career path, you tend to steer them away from it? I tell them because they come to me with this idea that it's glamorous, that what they are asking me is, how can I be on a podium, when everybody's, and say, let me tell you how I did it. How can I get to a stage where I get the applause, where I get the celebration? But the reality is that most of the heroes that we read about did not get to the point of that celebration. Rather, we are benefiting off their backs. They sacrificed their comfort and their luxuries so we could be comfortable and live in luxury today. And this is why I say that what lets evil thrive, that saying where all it takes for evil to thrive is for good men to do nothing. That's the point, to do nothing. And the reason a good man does nothing is because the good man is content and comfortable with what they already have in life. And that's why I tell you, I just realized this is going out publicly, but I don't mind telling the story. The Tuesday before I was arrested, I was sitting with a friend of mine in the car. And bear in mind, I'd been going around and telling people, guys, speak. And I'm aware who we're asking people to speak against. I'm aware it's a vicious lobby. I'm aware that it wields vicious power. I'm aware of the ferocity that it can deploy in order to silence people. We're talking about a power that's committed a genocide, that's blown off the legs of 6-year-old kids, that shot 320 bullets at 6-year-old Hind Rajab, that blew the head of Reem, the soul of my soul, Ruh al-Ruh, and that killed 100,000 or 200,000 Palestinians, and then told Sky News, why are you guys so worried about it? What is it that concerns you about it? The point that I'm saying is that, the point that I'm saying is that when it comes to that sort of power, when you're writing about it, I told this friend of mine, he said, Sami, how are you? I told him bluntly, I feel there are clouds swirling above me, but I can't shake off the feeling that something is coming. And I'm aware that the longer we go on about this, something is going to happen eventually that we're going to have to, it's going to be like a clash in that regard. The simple answer to your question is, what are we doing all this for? Is it for the glory, the Emmy Awards, the trophies and the like? Or is it because Yaqub, his rights have been wronged, and we are now challenging an entire state institution in one of the most powerful countries in the world for the sake of an individual that we will probably not benefit from later, but he deserves it because it's his human integrity. That we are speaking out for the Palestinians, not getting any reward from them, but they don't deserve to die, and therefore we have to go and do something. And this is why, and I finish on this particular point. When I was younger, my father used to give me a book of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, those who strove with him. And he said to me, which one of them would you most like to be? So I said to him, I'll read the book and I'll let you know afterwards. And he looked so disappointed. So I'd go on and we'd come across a figure like Sumayya, who, for example, she stood for what is right and what is just, and she was killed for it before the Prophet could even give that, could even speak out in public. And he kept going about all these people who sacrificed along the way until I gave him a list of everybody who was alive in the end. I told him one of these ones, the ones on the podium right at the end. And he asked me, he goes to me, what did you see in them that was superior to those who gave everything before? What did you see in those who were alive in the end that was greater than those who gave it all? And that's why I argue that when you talk about, what does it mean if we don't speak out? This is a scary field. It is a frightening field. I made a joke the other day. I bought this watch, this Apple Watch, just so I can be tracked. So in case I get stopped again, I don't need to call the family. They just know exactly where I am. And it's so, I know it sounds, but these are the calculations that you're making. But at the end of the day, somebody asked me a question, after what happened to you, would you do it again? Do you regret the things, that you did before? Why would I regret it? I hurt the oppressor. I made it so that the oppressor had to detain me for 2 weeks. My voice was powerful enough that they couldn't leave me alone. They had to put me in detention in 2 weeks. And even better than that, everybody came out, which meant that they couldn't keep me in. They had to release me after 2 weeks. There is nothing more fun in this job than making the oppressor lose sleep. There's nothing more fun in this job than knowing that you have the ability to make a difference. There's nothing more fun in this job than knowing that you are on the right path, that you are defending the dignity of human beings and that you are striving for their liberties and the like. And I'm a person who believes in the hereafter. I'm keeping a good record of it. I know they're keeping a good record up there, that on the day of judgment, I'll be like, listen, I attended a Zoom meeting with other activists as well. And I said to them, guys, don't worry if nothing pans out for us in this world. In the hereafter, we'll be perfectly fine. Oppressors will burn in hellfire and we'll be chilling in heaven.
Seth, I want to add something to what Sami just said before you ask Hassan, and it's only 1 minute. Sami happens to be the client that every attorney wants to have, because when we asked him the question of, would you like to go home? We've got this opportunity and we think it's one in the hand. It's a golden opportunity. His whole risk calculus was, if I stay in custody, how much more maximized opportunity is there to do good? It was the craziest conversation I've ever had. So I want to just give him a shout out and let Hassan tell you, confirm that is in fact what Sami said to us.
Yeah, it's the only client that we've had to drag out of detention.
Hassan, it's kind of hard to transition from that to sort of more in the weeds legal stuff, but I do think it's important to cover the argument that you've made in your court filings in Yaqub's case, but I assume it would apply in Sami's as well, that continued detainment for speech constitutes a prior restraint. And Chris, feel free to chime in here too. I'm just trying to spare you because I know you're under the weather, so I turn to Hassan. But people usually think, when they hear prior restraint, they think of the Pentagon Papers case. They think of a court specifically targeting speech and saying, you can't say that, you can't print that. This is a bit different. It's incarcerating someone and placing them in a position where they're unable to speak. Why do you see that as a form of prior restraint?
Well, I think Chris hit the nail on the head. I mean, they're taking a shredder to the First Amendment. It is beyond dispute that people like Sami, who are here in the United States, actually have First Amendment rights. And I guess bigger than that, it's the same playbook. I've been practicing law. I started practicing law right after 9/11. And back then it was NSEERS, the National Security Entry Exit Registration System, and there were all these people getting put into lengthy lines where they'd have to go and get registered, and most of them were put into removal proceedings. There was this knee-jerk sort of reaction. The Holy Land Foundation trial hadn't happened yet, but here in Virginia, where I am, there was the paintball cases, the Virginia 11. There were just a lot of and I remember once at an immigration interview, I'm talking to an officer, and he has a list of, this is back in 2003, 2004, and he has a list of questions that clearly somebody else gave him because he was reading it out like, verbatim for the first time. He's just reading it out. And there's even little notes scrawled on the side that said, if answer is yes, then ask this. And so there was a whole, script that was given to this officer. So he's about halfway through, and I'm a baby lawyer at this point, and I'm like, I didn't know what to do or what to say. So I look up at him and I said, who gave you those that note? Like, where is all this coming from? And he just stared at me. He didn't respond. And I asked again. I asked a third time, I asked a fourth time, and literally went up to his face, stood up, went up to his face, did this sort of thing, saying, hello, are you there? Is somebody there? There is a script. There is a playbook. And what I'm seeing in this administration has given me a sense of PTSD of the days after 9/11. It's the same crap. They've updated a few things. They're more surgical with it now. Absolutely. There's definitely changes. The fact that they're able to get, and find people like Sami and Mahmoud Khalil and Laqa Kurdiya and my client Dr. Badr Khan Suri and the rest of the people who have been, the fact that there's lists of people, the fact that there are that the same T word, the same terrorism is being weaponized, against these people, especially in the immigration context. It's nothing that we haven't seen before. And I think it's telling that in another one of my cases, in Dr. Badr Khan Suri's case, when she ordered him released from a detention facility in Texas, she said herself that she found that the reason for them detaining Dr. Suri, my client, who, by the way, was not an activist, had not spoken out, but was simply married to a Palestinian, and that was enough. We talk about First Amendment, there's a right of free association too, right? But was simply married, and that was enough for them to detain him. And she found, and it was the heaviest word I've ever heard in federal court, she found that the detention was punitive. And when she said that word punitive, it struck me. It's a moment I'm never gonna forget. Because there's this entire apparatus, as Sami was explaining. With Dr. Suri, they moved him 4 or 5 different locations, and moved him to Alexandria, Louisiana. But he was in Virginia, 3, 4 places in Virginia, then to Louisiana, and finally on to Texas. And I was really afraid that they were going to do the exact same thing to Sami when we got that call on Monday night, that he was going to be transferred to or sent to Fresno. So we don't know of any long-term detention facility in Fresno, but there is an airport there. And so we didn't know what was gonna come of it. So this entire apparatus, it's like this group of minions that does the bidding of the Pharaoh up on top, right? That does the bidding, and they've just reactivated it and repurposed it to be able to order a class struggle, order a struggle on anybody that they want. On anybody that they want. And, you know, the wrong ideology. I had a professor, and I'll close with this. One of the professors I deeply admire and respect the most was a professor of mine in college at UNC Chapel Hill. His name was Sidney Rittenberg, and he was the only American in the post-war years who was sent off to China and became a close member, like with Mao Zedong, of the Chinese Communist Party. Spent 35 years in China, 16 of which were in solitary confinement, and he had a lifelong belief in the power of in the power of communism, and devoted his life to it. And it wasn't until the very end when he finally saw that the way that the Chinese government was able to order a class struggle by saying things like, report on your neighbor if they're doing something suspicious. You know, if somebody's wearing glasses, that means that they read a lot. And if they read a lot, then we have to watch we need a report on what they're actually reading. And tearing down, you know, the Cultural Revolution, you know, millions of people lost their lives. And he said, the wrong ideology can produce thoughtless cruelty in otherwise good-hearted people. And that's a lesson that I didn't understand it. I was 19 when he told me about this when I was in college, but it's a line that I've come to appreciate more and more in my own work as practicing immigration law, because when a government, a ruling power, can order that struggle against individual people, it is only a matter of time before it's going to come for you. It's not if, it's when.
Quickly on the prior restraint point, because I think it's important to touch on that, is, you know, you pointed out, right, that it's typically, people think of the Pentagon Papers, they think of some order or an ordinance that prevents you from saying or publishing something in particular. I think that the law is full of really silly ideas, right? And you're trained, I think, a little bit to sort of abandon common sense for certain things. Doctrinally, traditionally, a prior restraint is just as you said, right, this order to not do something. But when the government detains you because of your speech in order to prevent you from speaking again, that strikes me as the most extreme form of prior restraint that could possibly exist, right? Like, well, I guess, you know, other than ones that would prevent you from suing afterwards. But that is like, we can't allow ourselves, I think, in a moment like this, to just like hew to like the sort of like, we need to be bold in our arguments. We need to be sort of creative. We need to explain things in a fundamentally like sort of common sense way, because this isn't, you're not just talking to the judge in these cases, you're talking to everybody, right? These cases, and we're very purposeful, Eric and I, my law partner, in being very public about our cases. Because one, it can make a difference in terms of just attention can make a difference. But two, it's because this is all pointless if people don't look up and say, oh, holy crap, like this is, there are fundamental norms being violated. And it is the government's sort of, the government benefits when it traps you in these very idiosyncratic technicalities of, well, you're technically this and not that, and that doesn't apply here, and so we win. Like, we have to be conversant in those things. We have to be able to navigate those things, but it shouldn't prevent us from putting forth like common sense arguments for why this is not allowed, not only for this reason, but also for these 10 other reasons. Because it's just logical, right? It just doesn't make sense to think about it in any other way. The government is doing this, they're not even really doing it in retaliation. Like, they are, like, of course they are. That's how they got to know you. But their purpose is not to punish you. Their purpose is to stop you from speaking moving forward, and punishment is the modality, right? It's not the end. And so that's a prior restraint if I've ever heard one. And that is what is so dangerous about this, because it's not just about the individual. It chills so many other people from speaking. People are petrified, non-citizens in particular, but just generally, right? I mean, we've seen there has not been, I mean, the campus protests are kind of quiet now, right? They're not huge. They're not, I mean, they were just brutally oppressed by universities collaborating with the government, by public universities, you know, the government themselves. Like, it is, and then there's like pressure on law firms and pressure on institutions like universities to comply. And I'll stop with this. Like, it is not a coincidence, I think, that all of this is being done in the name of my protection, right? Like, and Sam's protection, right? It's not a coincidence that the descent into fascism in the United States is predicated on combating anti-Semitism. And that is because Zionism, right, which is being sort of enacted into law in terms of like a sort of, if you are not a Zionist, you're going to go to jail, itself has always been very comfortable with fascism, right? If you don't hew the line, if you don't look like us, if you don't belong, then you don't have rights, and we can do whatever we want to you, right? That is happening in this weird civic version in the United States, this like civic fascism, where it's not necessarily racial, right? I think that that's part of it always, right? But it's multiracial in the sense that they have decided who is American. They've decided who belongs and who believes in X, Y, or Z, who does, it fits in with the culture. It was explicitly in an executive order signed on day one, right? And they are going to, if you don't belong, put you in a camp, right, where you are treated horrifically, and try to remove you quickly, either by pressuring or loading up the immigration courts with yes men and yes women, or they're going to make your life intolerable, if not just an actual like really dangerous situation in some of these facilities where disease runs rampant and all kinds of things. And they're going to remove and pressure all of the people on the outside to stop them from, in the journalist's case, from shedding a light on it, to stop the lawyers from making arguments. And either because they're explicitly threatening them, or they're going to be like, well, technically, it's not a prior restraint. And that to me is just silly. And we have to sort of face this for what it is. This isn't, it's similar in so many ways, of course, as Hassan said, right? The playbook is so similar and expanded in some ways, but the breadth of this, this isn't just about getting Muslims out of the United States. It is Muslims are for sure on this side of the American line, but it is much, much broader than that. And it is extraordinarily dangerous and antithetical to the stated views of the people in power about what the United States is or should be. That's how we have to treat it at every level, both in advocacy, but also in our legal filings.
That was great, Chris. I feel like you articulated thoughts that were sort of swimming around in my head for the entirety of my 13-year legal career, but that I never really was able to assemble coherently. But we're seeing it more and more, how these well-intentioned protections for free speech operate to encourage even broader censorship. In an unrelated context, we saw it early on in the Trump administration when, courts pushed back on expelling the Associated Press from the press pool for saying Gulf of Mexico. Well, in response to that, they said, okay, well, if I can't target the Associated Press based on its viewpoint, we'll just ban the whole press. We'll just ban everybody then. Same thing here. You've got Pentagon Papers and other cases and other precedents that say you can't order a speaker not to say a specific thing, publish a specific document. Okay, we won't. Instead, we'll lock speakers up so they can't say anything at all. That's not the intention of the law, but that's the way it's carried out when, as you're saying, people treat it too literally and don't apply some common sense, both as lawyers and as advocates. So really well said. I think we can wrap there. Pretty much every other question I had has been addressed in some way or another. Unless there's anything that anyone else wanted to get on the record, feel free. But otherwise, Sam, did you unmute?
Oh, yeah. I mean, honestly, yeah, I did want to mention just because, Sami, Hassan, and Chris all had such great points to make, and I feel like I'd kind of be remiss not kind of speaking about this in terms of Yaqub's case. Uh, Chris hit the nail right on the head exactly, with how wide-reaching this is going to be, with the intent of it. Just in terms of practical effects, I know that the folks protesting feel Yaqub's absence in the sense that Yaqub provided people within that space a little bit more of the substance that they were able to actually, like the information that they were using as their engine. Just definitely just wanted to kind of just say that this is just such a critical point. People like Yaqub, and also this industry just in general. I think that, Seth, you probably are aware of the fact that, whenever press bodies, especially legacy press bodies, talk about objectivity in journalism, they're kind of more talking about decontextualizing things to a place of comfort for most people who read it. And we're definitely seeing concepts like that, concepts like, this initiative against anti-Semitism, all that stuff being weaponized to fight free speech. So just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Sam. And thanks so much to everyone for joining today and for staying late. And particularly thanks to Sami and Samaya for making time. I guess you don't know how you're going to react to a situation until you've been there, but I'm pretty sure that if I spent 18 days in ICE detention, I would take a couple of weeks before joining any Zoom panels. So much appreciated. If anyone wants to just briefly tell our listeners where they can learn more about you or your work, I guess I can go in order. Marium.
MLFA.org. Yeah.
Sam.
Journo Judy on social media. You could just look up Sam Judy. The only other Sam Judy is some kid that plays college football, who I support the career of. I think he's doing great. But there's only really two Sam Judys on Google, and I'm one of them. So yeah.
You're lucky. There's another Seth Stern who is also a lawyer and journalist, and we've been getting each other's emails for like 20 years. Samantha.
Atlanta Community Press Collective. We're on Instagram at atlpresscollective.com. We're also participating in the Newsmatch fundraiser. So every dollar you donate to the Atlanta Community Press Collective is like quadrupled or something until the end of the year. We got our start really quick. We got our start by covering the Defend the Atlanta Forest movement / the Stop Cop City movement here in Atlanta, which, we've been talking a lot about terrorism. Speaking of terrorism, really huge group of people in Atlanta, have been accused of domestic terrorism, and that was a RICO, prosecution that hung over their head for 2 years. And so, when we're talking about advocacy, subjecting people to, risk of, being accused of terrorism, that's definitely a really prominent example that affects not just, Muslim people and people advocating for Palestine, but it's indicative of the fact that, any type of advocacy viewed as subversive can really subject people to, really harmful criminal sanctions. So this is an issue that affects all of us, no matter what kind of cause you're fighting for. So thanks, Seth.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Stop Cop City is turning out not to be some one-off sloppy overreach by prosecutors, but a blueprint. We're seeing the Trump administration talk about the idea of RICO indictments of anarchists, leftists, Antifa, whatever it may be. We're seeing that become mainstream. In Texas, you've got the Prairie Land case right now, where 20 people are facing indictment over one alleged gunshot. One of the people facing indictment wasn't even there at the protest where the police officer was allegedly shot. He was indicted for transporting anarchist zines afterwards. The theory being that those zines were evidence that would have incriminated his wife, who was at the protest. How possession of political theory is incriminating evidence beats me, but that's where we are today. Sami, Samoya, anywhere we can find more on you and your work? Skip them. They're probably off dealing with those kids who kept popping up on the screen. Chris?
Our firm website's Godshall-Bennett.com. It looks like every other law firm website, so you probably won't learn anything useful. And then my Twitter or whatever X is CGB_ATTY. Also don't really use it that much because I value my peace. But that's where I am.
Hassan?
Probably the easiest is on most social media. It's HMA ESQ. On Blue Sky, X, most of the others. My website is hma-legal.com. There's actually 4 Hassan Ahmad attorneys in the Washington, D.C. area, and we get each other's mail. The day that Badr Khan Suri got arrested, the other Hassan Ahmad at Covington Burling got 30 or 35 emails from journalists, including a text message including an email from somebody in Badr Khan Suri's building who using her camera, videotaped his arrest. And that's how we got the picture. It was sent to the wrong Hassan Ahmad, and luckily, because we knew each other, that's how we got that.
I went to law school with the other Hassan, actually.
You did? Well, there you go. It's a small.
Yeah.
We should start a firm,
Right. It's funny. All right. Well, as I said at the outset, if you want to learn more about Freedom of the Press Foundation and other press freedom issues, sign up for our newsletters at freedom.press/newsletters. Visit freedom.press, the Press Freedom Tracker. Our database of press freedom violations around the country is pressfreedomtracker.us. And if you are inclined to give us money, freedom.press/donate. We, like all these other nonprofits doing great work these days, we all need it. Thanks again to all of our panelists for being here. We really appreciate your time. And thanks to the audience for sticking with us. We will be in touch soon about our next event. Thanks, everyone.